If you're sick of waking up with stiff hips and a sore low back, this 3-step process is for you. I'm going to drop the science first, but if you're not interested in the science and you just want to jump right into the 3-step process, it is time-stamped down below, so go ahead and jump ahead.
This right here, this is why hip rotation actually matters. This guy had excruciating lower back pain in his squat, so much so they had to stop squatting altogether. He tried physio, he tried stretching, he tried chiropractor, he tried everything. And the answer was actually in how his hip moves. We found the missing link when he entered into the hip mobility lab. You see, his hips weren't rotating properly. And if your hips don't rotate properly, it means that they're not doing their job. And that means that your lower back, it has to take over a lot of the force. When your hips aren't working the way that they're supposed to work, your lower back has to take over and it has to overwork. And this is why both your hips and your low back get really sore. And this is exactly how we're gonna fix it. Step number 1, we're both gonna warm up your hip and give you a self-assessment for your hips so you can actually see how well do your hips rotate. Internal rotation is one of the most important things a hip can do, but is often overlooked. Hip internal rotation is gonna determine how healthy is your deepest hip capsule. And when your deepest hip capsule is healthy, that spreads outwards to everything around it. So here's exactly how you're gonna do a self-assessment and see how is your hip internal rotation. Meet me on the floor down here. You're gonna lay on your back on the floor and just stack your knee so it's right on top of that hip capsule. Go ahead and place your hands on your hips so you know you're not wiggling around. Then go ahead and turn your foot as far to the outside as you can. This is hip internal rotation. You should be getting a contraction in your hip right here. Go ahead and move that back and forth a couple times. That way we are both warming up the hip and you can see how much movement do you have in your hip right here. If you're getting kind of stuck partway through, you can't get that far out, we have found your problem and I'm gonna show you exactly how you're gonna fix it. But first, let's warm up the other side. Go ahead and see if there's any differences from side to side here. Keep that knee stacked directly over your hip, move out as far as you can, and come back in. Every time you come out, we want to feel a nice contraction in the side of that hip, getting that good squeeze and warming up that really deep inner hip capsule. Let's give that 2 more reps for our warm up here, giving yourself a little note. How far can you rotate today? Because that is going to change over time of doing this class. So now you've discovered your hip is actually lacking some rotation and this is your missing link. So now, step number 2, let's learn how to create some range. Stay with me through this process. I promise it is so worth it. To increase the range in your hip, we're gonna do something called Pale's contractions. And before you ask, yes, this is science-backed in that it works significantly better than stretching alone. I'm gonna show you exactly how and explain why. First, if you have a yoga block, go ahead and grab it. If you don't have a yoga block, grab a thick book. Don't have a thick book? No problem. You can do it without. This is just really nice width. We're gonna get in what is called a 90-90 position. How do you know if you're in 90-90? Your front knee is gonna line up with the center of your chest and your heel is lined up with your knee. Your back knee is lined up with the center of your hip. Your heel is lined up with your knee. 90-90. If you do have your yoga block or thick book, go ahead and prop it up underneath your front hip. If you don't, just skip that step, no problem, and come do this with us anyways. Next, we are gonna find our stretch into our back hip right here. This hip is already biased into internal rotation. Let's use that to our advantage. Take your hands, kickstand back behind you. The farther back you go, the easier it tends to be for people who lack internal rotation. So don't be afraid to lean way back. Next, we're going to think about turning our chest as much towards that back foot as you possibly can. Now we get this really great stretch in the side of the hip right here. If you've already found that stretch, just go ahead and sit in it. If you need to troubleshoot for a second, No problem. Let's do that one more time. See this hip right here? You're just going to sink it down towards the floor. Sink your weight deep into that hip as you turn your chest as far towards that back foot as you possibly can. Now we have a really nice stretch into the side of the hip. A lot of people say the stretch feels really deep into your hip capsule. And that's because it is. We are working with the deepest tissue inside that hip capsule. This is meant to create what is called capsular space. Sit in this with me for a second. I know sometimes it's tempting to just jump out, but I promise you, this time is so worth it. This is going to fix your hips and your low back in one move. So we're just going to take a few deep breaths here before we start our PALS contraction. And what that means is we're going to actually be activating the hip. We're going to teach your central nervous system how to build strength and control deep into that hip. And this is why this works so much better than passive stretching alone, because it makes your mobility stick. It is mobility times strength. This is strength training for deep inside your joints. Let's do it together now. How are you going to start that? That back foot, just start pressing it into the ground. Imagine that there's a scale underneath your foot and you're trying to make the number of that scale go up. As you're driving that back foot into the ground, we get activation into all that tissue that was just being stretched. And go ahead and press fairly hard here. You got some big muscles in your hips. They can take a little bit of force input. See if you can press just a little harder now for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Relax. This is where the magic happens. Now see if you can get a little bit deeper into your stretch by turning your chest even farther towards that back foot. Even if you just got a couple millimeters, millimeters counts. Millimeters adds up to so much over weeks and months of doing this. Did you feel that magic? Let's do it one more time. Go ahead and start pushing that back foot down into the floor. On the second round, I want you to see if you can press a little bit harder than you did on your first round. See if you can ramp up a little bit of tension here. The harder you push, the more you're going to get out of this. So keep pushing now as hard as you can for another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Relax. And the magic, turn your chest more towards that back foot, getting slightly deeper into that range. Take a breath. And we're gonna get out of it. Go ahead and move out nice and slow in whatever way feels comfortable to you. And then we gotta do the other side. All right, we need even legs here, so make sure you're jumping into the other side with me. We don't wanna skip out on this now, even out your body. Go ahead and come into your 90-90. So we have the front knee lined up with the center of the chest, heel lined up with the knee. Back knee lined up with the center of the hip, heel lined up with that knee. Grab your block or a big book, put it underneath that front hip. Take your hands, kickstand your hands back behind you. Remember, the farther back you go, the easier it can be. Turn your chest as much towards that back foot as you possibly can. This is how we are turning our pelvis around our femur, which is this bone in our leg right here. And that is how we're actually getting more rotation, is by that idea of turning our pelvis around our femur. So make sure that you know this is the most important step here. Turn your chest as much towards that back foot as you can. Find that nice deep stretch in the side of your hip. Now I want you to take a couple deep breaths with me here, because like I said, we're dropping science with this. This is backed as the best way that you can improve your hip mobility. So what are you gonna do but sit in the stretch before we start our PALS contractions? I know, I get it. In our 21st century lifestyle where we're running around all the time, when somebody says, just sit in the stretch, it can be difficult. It can be the point that you want to jump out and go somewhere else. If you stay with me while we are sitting in the stretch, I promise you, this is a game changer. Anybody who has improved their mobility vastly doesn't spend 30 minutes in the stretch. They spend 90 seconds to 2 minutes in the stretch. Why is that? Science shows the body has a stretch reflex. Your body holds on. It tightens up your tissue. It doesn't want you to have more range right away because it's scared that it's going to get hurt in that new range. So it holds on, even though you might have a little bit more. All the science shows that when you can sit in the stretch and breathe for just 90 seconds to 2 minutes, your progress exponentially better. Exponentially. It's amazing how much faster you improve over the course of a few months than if you just sit in it for 30 seconds and get out. So if you take anything away from today, that is so worth it to know. Oh my goodness, that is how you're gonna be like that guy that completely eliminated the back pain that he had in his squats. Know that. Okay, so now that we've done exactly that, we've sat here long enough, we can start our Pales contractions. That back foot, start driving it into the ground. Press down. We are activating all of the tissue that was just being stretched. We're sending our body a signal here. This is how we strengthen the hip. This is how we learn to control the hip. This is how we teach the hip to do its job. So not only does the hip feel better, but your low back feels better too. Keep pushing for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Relax. Find that magic. Turn that chest towards that back foot just a little bit more and take a couple breaths. And we're gonna do it one more time. Ready? Last time. Go ahead, start driving the foot down. Think about this second round as a max effort. The more that you put into the second round, the more you're gonna get out of it. The faster your mobility is gonna improve. The faster you're gonna teach your hip, this is how you do your job. The faster you're gonna eliminate your low back pain. Go ahead and push max effort for another 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Relax completely. Find your magic. Turning your chest a little bit more towards your back foot. Getting a little bit deeper into that range. We got this great stretch through here. Okay, now we're gonna come out of this and there's only one more step until you are gonna know exactly how to eliminate your back pain for good. This is why the Hip Mobility Lab is not just another mobility program. We're actually retraining your nervous system how to control the joint so that you can have better mobility for good. So step 3 is where most people mess up. You can't just run away after your stretch. You need to strengthen that range right after you've created it. This signals to your body, hey body, we can be strong here, and you actually get to keep the new range. We've all had that experience where you're like, okay, I feel tight, I'm gonna stretch. You stretch, you feel better, you wake up the next day and you're like, damn, I feel exactly the way that I did the day before. Oh, so frustrating, right? This is how you get out of that cycle. You strengthen the range right after you've created it. Let me show you how. Come down, side lying on the floor. Throw your yoga block between your knees. If you don't have a yoga block, throw a pillow in there or anything else. These are internal rotation lift-offs, where you come up and you squeeze the side of your hip. We are strengthening all that new range that you just created in your hip. The key to make this the most effective is every single time you come up, you think, can I get just a little bit higher? Can I pull just a little bit more? The more you feel that contraction in there, the better this is going to be for you. Let's do 3 more reps. Up, pull, hold, 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 and down. Up, pull, hold, 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 and down. One more. Up, pull. How high can you go? Fight for it. On that last rep, fight a little more, and down. All right, we'll shift right over to the other side. This is a great opportunity to teach your hip how to do its job, right? So as you come up, here's some stuff you can watch out for. Are you dipping your body forward as you come up? If so, you probably don't really feel it in your hip very much, right? Keep your shoulders stacked on top of each other. Make sure your hips are stacked. All of that movement is only coming from the hip. So now you're just gonna feel that contraction deep into the hip, right through here, all of these muscles here. We're building really strong, resilient hips by doing this movement, not only saving all the work that you just put in with your pales contractions, but making sure that your hips are so strong, they understand how to do their job. Because remember, what is the tightest is often the weakest. This is where the change happens. No more just stretching and hoping, but we're building hips that actually work. If you've been dealing with tight, locked up hips, struggling with lower back pain, struggling with squat depth, then this is the work that you actually need. Inside the Hip Mobility Lab, I take you through step-by-step classes just like this, but personalized to your unique needs, thanks to the thorough assessment at the start of the program, so that we can unlock your hips for good. The only thing that you're gonna wish is that you started this sooner. So check out the description below to jump into the Hip Mobility Lab and start fixing your hips today.